listening to the Motherhood Experience, a podcast where you are part of the conversation with moms, for moms, and by moms. Let's jump into this episode with me, your host, Val Kleppen. Welcome back to another Tuesday, another episode of the Motherhood Experience podcast. I'm your host, Val, and I am so thrilled you are joining me here today. If you remember way back, if you're one of the OG listeners, episode 4 was with my coworker, Elisha Ford. And Elisha introduced me to today's guest, Lauren Zwick. Lauren has an incredible story of surprises and triumphs and just a sweet spirit that she shares it all in. I'm excited for you to listen to her journey in today's episode. Before we do that, remember all of the requests. Follow us, like us on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. Subscribe, comment, share, all of the things. I appreciate it so much. And now into this episode. I am pleased to have with me Lauren Zwick. Lauren, it's so nice to meet you. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on, Val.
Wonderful. Glad to hear it. And yeah, welcome to the Motherhood Experience podcast. We like to start every episode here with ages and stages of your kids and where you're at in motherhood. So why don't you lead us off with that?
Yeah, so I am very solidly in the having all elementary kids stage of motherhood. So I have 4 kids, and they were all born really close together. So I have my oldest, Joshua, is 10. And then I have twin girls, Emma and Lily, who are 8. And then I have a 6-year-old son, Matthew. So kindergarten, 2nd grade, and 4th grade.
So the oldest is still quite young.
Yes. Yep. He was 22
you really are
months
in the thick of it.
when,
Yeah.
Yeah, he was 22 months when we had twins. So.
Wow. And do twins run on either side of the family? Were they a total surprise?
Nope, they were a total surprise.
And twin girls, and I know that they have a unique story as well. Would you like to tell us about that?
Yeah, so, well, often people ask, are they identical? Which genetically they are identical. But if you see like a picture of them, you can tell they don't look, they have like the same hair and eye color and everything, but you wouldn't peg them as identical twins. You can definitely tell them apart. They're like at least 6 inches apart in height, if not a little more, I'm not sure. But they both have Mosaic Down syndrome. So that just means some of their chromosome, or some of their cells have the extra copy of the 21st chromosome and some do not. And so it's just a more rare form of Down syndrome. It affects people super differently, and they are very differently affected by that. So, and we learned about that diagnosis at birth. I mean, it was a lot longer story than that, but that was right. When we found out was when they were born and still in the NICU. So.
Wow. Okay, so you had a 22-month-old when they were born.
Yes.
Was he speaking? Was he super active? Was he keeping you on your toes and all of this while you were pregnant?
Yep. So yes, he was a very busy toddler, although he was an early reader and he was really into reading books, or like looking at books. He wasn't reading quite then, but he was very into just looking at books quietly. And it's not like he was always doing that all the time. I mean, he was still a toddler, but that was a big blessing, was that as far as like kids go, his temperament, he was pretty easygoing overall, was a pretty easy baby and pretty easy toddler. And I was really sick during pregnancies always. And so like, it was very helpful that he, in between all of his play, like he would just sit and look at books for a really long time. And so that was very helpful. And yeah, he was a really easygoing big brother. Like when the girls came along, he was super excited to have two babies. He was not like the jealous type at all. He didn't have too many like big behavior things that happened. So that was really, really just a huge blessing. We have a video of him one of the early days, I think either in the hospital or maybe when we were home. And he was looking at the two girls. I think we were at home because they were on their tummies on the floor. And he was like looking at them and he goes, baby, more baby. And so he was just delighted by his little sisters. And he still is a great, great big brother. But yeah, that helped a lot because there was a lot of other stressors that came along um, with their birth. So
Right. So
yeah.
let me back up a little bit. And I think I know, um were you a teacher?
Yes. So I am a special education teacher right now, but I was home for the last 9 years with my kids
Okay.
until like this year was my first year back to work full time because my youngest was going to kindergarten. Um, so I was home. My husband is also a teacher, he's a music teacher. Um, so he's been teaching this whole time, but the last time I was in the classroom, like I was pregnant with my oldest, Joshua. So
Oh,
that was,
wow.
yeah. So like 10 years ago, I was a special ed teacher then as well, but it had been a long time.
Right. So, okay, my mind is already going in so many places. When you and your husband were married,
Mhm.
you're both education majors, I'm guessing. Were you fresh
Mhm.
out of college or in college when you met and married?
Yes, we met in college. We actually met through a campus ministry. I mean, we were both education majors, but we met through this campus ministry. Um, and then I started teaching. My husband's a year younger than me, so like we got married, and my first year teaching was his like student teaching.
Okay. Hmm.
Semester we both did 4.5, so we did our student teaching in the fall. So anyway,
Okay.
um,
Yeah.
so yeah, so I taught for a year. I was pregnant by the end of the year with Joshua, so my first trimester was like at the end of that school year. But then this ministry that we worked with, we had wanted to do this internship with them. So that's how we ended up in North Dakota for a while. Um, we lived there for 2 years. Like that's where our firstborn was born, and now we live in Wisconsin, which is like where we met and where we grew up, and where our family is and everything. So,
Okay.
so yeah, so we actually moved back to Wisconsin while I was pregnant with the twins. So we were just in North Dakota for 2 years, doing some college campus ministry, and then we came back to Wisconsin, and my husband went back to teaching, or started teaching, I guess, because he hadn't jumped into teaching yet. Um, and then I was home with kids.
So I mean, obviously there's always been a draw to children and caring for children, nurturing them. So did you did you always know that you would want to be a teacher, and did you always know that motherhood was just something that you would pursue?
Yeah, I think I had both of those dreams when I was pretty young. I remember doing a presentation when I was in 6th grade about being like a kindergarten teacher or an elementary teacher. Um, I always loved the elementary age, especially even when, like I said, I was only in middle school, but um, I loved babysitting. I loved doing VBS through church. Eventually, I worked at a daycare for a while in college. I just always wanted to work with kids and loved working with kids. And I actually babysat for a number of different families with twins, which is kind of cool. That
So it's
experience too.
contagious.
I guess I don't know, but um, so yeah. And then my mom stayed home with us, and I have a lot of educators in my family. She was a speech therapist, but she stayed home with us, and then she did a number of um, kind of like part-time things in the education field once we were all in school. So I have three brothers, so there's four of us in my family. And um my mom was just always there for us. She was always there, before school. She was always there after school. And she always kind of stayed on our schedule even when she was working, and I really enjoyed that, and I benefited a lot from that. And I think I just always wanted that, and I always knew like that I really wanted kids, and I knew that I wanted to, even like staying home with my kids for as long as I did, like that was like, it was definitely had a lot of challenges, but I wanted to do it. I've talked to many
Yeah.
women that they didn't quite choose it. It kind of was like a childcare cost issue, or like, just whatever circumstances. And that's, I think, maybe harder, because I did want to do it, even though there was a lot of really hard things about it too. So,
Right. Right. It's definitely a sacrifice in
mhm.
a lot of ways. What led you into special education? What was the draw there?
Well, I didn't switch to special education until I was halfway through college. I was an elementary ed major, so I didn't make like a huge change. But a lot of I was a special ed minor. Um, and
Hmm.
then I just, through some of my experiences, we just had a lot of like classroom experiences and volunteering, and even the daycare that I worked with over the summers. Like, I was working a lot with students with various disabilities, and I was just really drawn to those kids and formed connections with those kids and just really enjoyed it, and thought, maybe I should do this instead. I also have an aunt that was a special education teacher um, for about 30 years, I think, and she now continues to do stuff with a school board and all of those things. And she was very involved with like coaching Special Olympics. And I think I just always kind of had that passion there, and then had people around me that were setting those examples too. So,
Yeah. Oh, wow. Okay, so I'm skipping around a lot, and you're doing a fantastic job keeping up with the random jumping off points I'm taking here in the conversation. But after you had your son and you're full blown into motherhood now with him, was it what you expected or anticipated or dreamt that it would be?
so he ended up being a NICU baby. So my first three kids were all in the NICU. Um,
Really?
yeah, but so basically what happened, I mean, it was a really long labor, and by the end of it, he was like in distress. Um, and like while I was pushing and everything, they were, monitoring him. And then it was kind of to the point they were like things are kind of going downhill. If you don't get him out in a couple pushes, like we're going to have to do a C-section. They ended up using like the vacuum extraction kind of thing to help deliver him. But then when he came out, he was crying, but he was like whimpering kind of more so than full out crying. So he was having some
Hmm.
trouble breathing. He was covered in meconium. They thought he had like aspirated. Um,
Sure.
so he was only in the NICU for 3 days. He was full term. Like, he was okay in the end. But starting off that way, like very unexpectedly, everything had gone pretty smoothly with the pregnancy and whatever. That had not been on my radar at all. We had just moved very far away from our family a couple months prior, so I was already feeling, kind of lonely and isolated and gone through a lot of changes. And then that happened, and then just a number of things happened, like a nurse, giving him a bottle of formula right away after I like worked really hard to pump and was trying to get upstairs to the NICU. And like, I am not like anti-formula. I'm just saying it was like one of those like, oh my gosh, like I already feel so out of control of what's
Right,
happening
right.
to me and what's happening to my baby. And so, but I think it was, it was recognizing like just sort of that reality, the heaviness of like, wow, I have this little baby that I am just in love with and I'm here to care for and whatever, but so much is not in my control and is not ever going to be in my control. And I remember like the gravity of that hitting me even in those early days and that being really hard. And I think maybe that piece is something that I wasn't expecting.
Mm-hmm.
Um and then just like, moving forward, like I said, he was a pretty easy baby. Like I can say that in hindsight, looking back, because one of my girls was very fussy, and my youngest was just very like clingy to mama all the time, didn't want to be put down. Like, so I went through those kinds of things with some of the other kids. So now looking back, I'm like, wow, he was a pretty easy baby. But at the time, I always tell first time moms, I'm like, I just try to validate them because I'm like, I remember feeling like this was the hardest thing I had ever done. This was, such a, like, it was just so hard when he would just cry and cry about something. And it wasn't even that often that that happened. Like, he was a good sleeper, but even just the newborn stage of not getting good sleep, like those things were all so hard because you don't know what you don't know. And if you've never experienced it before, it's hard because it's new. It wasn't until my fourth born that I was like, okay, like we know what to do now because, I've handled my firstborn and I've handled twins. So now this is just like a lot easier.
So he was full term and in the NICU for 3 days. I bet he was just like a giant in the
He
NICU.
was. Yeah.
Like
And
looked like he could eat all of the other babies.
yeah. And it was like an older style NICU that like there's just like curtains in between. You just kind of had kind of your little zone. It wasn't
Yeah.
when my girls were born, we had our own like little room, all these like separate rooms with doors that were more like
Oh wow.
hospital rooms. So, and you had a lot more like privacy and peace and quiet. This was just like a crammed NICU with lots of little babies nearby. So yes,
And
I
one big
saw
baby.
some, and one very big baby. Yes, he looked huge. He was like 7.5 pounds, so he's a pretty average sized baby. But yes, he looked humongous because there was probably like a 3 pound baby next to us. So
Right. Right.
yeah.
I remember going to the NICU, I think to pump or drop off milk or something for my oldest,
Mm-hmm.
who was a preemie, and they did like a nursery check or something. So all of the other babies that had been born on the floor were all in this one room, and they just all looked gigantic compared to my little 2.5 pounder
Oh.
in the NICU isolette there. But um, so you said also that the twins, spent time in the NICU, and that's when they said, "Hey, we think we're noticing something here." So were the twins early? Did they come early, and were there complications in their delivery?
Yes, they were 34 weeks and 6 days. So almost 35, which is pretty good. Identical
Right.
twins share a placenta. So oftentimes, just because they're sharing, you're supporting two babies on one placenta, it kind of can like fail, for lack of a better word, like a little earlier. Like 37 weeks is considered full term with identical twins. So yeah, I got pretty far in the pregnancy, all things considered. But Emma was growth restricted, so Lily was
Mm.
5.5 pounds and Emma was 3.5 pounds.
Oh, wow.
Which, yeah, it was pretty small for how far along I was.
Right.
But she had not really grown much those last like 2 or 3 weeks. Um, she kind of didn't grow as far as they could tell. And that's because
And
she had like a very small share of the placenta. There was like there was a blood sharing thing going on. Lily had like you the doctor showed me the placenta. It was like the Lily had like a huge share of it. You could see all the vessels, and the vessels were larger, and like her umbilical cord, like everything was larger, and Emma's was like tiny. Um, so she just wasn't getting as much nourishment.
well, when in your pregnancy did you discover that you were having twins?
I was really early on, actually. It was like my first appointment. I was only 8 or 10 weeks
Oh,
along,
wow.
and they had done like a early ultrasound um at like the first appointment to confirm the pregnancy kind of appointment. And yeah, the the person doing the ultrasound, I knew the minute the like image came on the screen. I was like, oh my gosh, there's two babies in there. Like, I knew right away because I remembered what my son's early ultrasound had looked like, and there was just very clearly two little babies in there. And then like
Yeah.
a second later, the person doing the ultrasound was like, well, I see something in there. I actually think I see two somethings in there. I was like, oh, I do too. Um, so so yeah, that was pretty shocking. And I was by myself. Like, my husband was just at work. My friend was watching Joshua. And I just went by myself because I was like, oh, second baby, like, I've done this all before. I'll just go by myself and it'll be fine. So that was fun to tell everyone about.
So so you found out early you were having twins. So
Mhm.
you had essentially 26-ish weeks after that knowing that they were twins, and
Mhm.
then you delivered them. How long were they in the NICU?
Lily was in 8 days and Emma was in 17. So
Okay.
really, it felt like forever, but it really wasn't that long as far as like
Right.
some preemies go.
What was it in the NICU that made the neonatologist or the nurses, whoever it was, say, we think we should look into this a little bit?
There were indications throughout my pregnancy that something might be going on. So it wasn't a total like 100% shock out of nowhere. You know, my pregnancy was I was having ultrasounds every 2 weeks, the whole pregnancy. And then near the end, I was having ultrasounds like the very end, it was like every 3 days, just because the high risk nature of it, and they were monitoring a lot of things. Emma had 3 holes in her heart that they were monitoring, and those closed at birth. But like, that was like one indicator in hindsight. Just some of those things.
Sure.
Her legs measured shorter compared to like her torso ratio, and that can be like a marker for Down syndrome, or some other conditions. Like, it Down syndrome did not come up at all in any of the things that the doctors were looking at. At one point, Emma had some fluid in part of her brain that Lily did not, and the doctor was like, well, at this stage of the pregnancy, it was at like 16 weeks. I was getting an anatomy scan, and that's a little early. Normally that's at 20 weeks. And so he was like, well, it kind of varies by babies, and sometimes this fluid is present in the brain up until like 18 or 20 weeks. However, one twin, it's already like developed, and the other one, it's not. So I'm confused. Mostly identical twins are going to develop around the same stage. So then he thought that Emma had this thing called Dandy Walker syndrome. It's a condition, and I won't pretend like I know a ton about it, but it can cause like seizures and like hydrocephalus, so like water in the brain, that can affect the baby, when they're born, and like can cause some lifelong disabilities. Yes, we thought she had this Dandy Walker syndrome. But then we went back 2 weeks later and the fluid had cleared and everything looked okay. And he's like, oh, well, that's not what it is. Never mind. Then we just kept watching things. We went to a cardiologist a few times. And then, like I said, later on, she had this growth restriction. So we just kind of had a lot of pieces at play. A lot of appointments were very nerve-wracking, and I remember just like constantly trying to monitor if the girls were moving enough, and they were kind of laying side by side. So like I kind of knew, okay, Emma's over here, and I would like try to track if she was moving or was it Lily moving. It's like hard to tell. And so I just kind of remember a lot of anxiety during that pregnancy, and just all of that to say, by 30 some weeks, I did some like genetic blood testing because I was like, I just need to know something. If something's going on, I want to be prepared. Well, that came back as negative for Down syndrome and a possible positive for Mosaic Turner syndrome, which is just a different chromosomal disorder. And so that is where I like learned about mosaicism, and the geneticist from the hospital explained what it meant. He said it was like maybe 50% accurate, or it wasn't like a for sure thing. He was like, the only way you'd know is with an amnio, and I was already like 33 weeks by that point. And so they didn't, they said, if you want to do it, you can do it. The risk is preterm labor. I was like, no, I'll just wait. Because by that point, like I knew I was getting close to delivering. And
We'll get back to our conversation, but first, a note from our sponsor. We are sponsored by another podcast called What You Didn't Expect in Fertility, Pregnancy, and Birth, Real Stories, and Expert Insights. It's a show for anyone who has taken the giant leap into pregnancy and encountered things along the way that they didn't expect. We hear how other people manage their unexpected challenges, from emergency C-section to preeclampsia and everything in between. We also learn from doctors and therapists who share insights about what we do and don't know about this enormous transition. If you're looking to better understand something you experienced in fertility, pregnancy, birth, or postpartum, join us. A recent popular episode is What Birth Trauma Can Look Like After Time to Reflect, Alexis's Birth Story, Part 1. You can find the link for this podcast and sponsor down in the description below. And now, back to our episode.
Yeah. So then, like, once they were born, the minute they put the girls in my arms, I looked at Emma and I was like, oh, she has Down syndrome. Like, I knew right away. I didn't say it out loud to anybody. I just knew by her kind of facial features. She just looked like she had Down syndrome. Now, Lily did not. Her eyes are shaped differently than Emma's, so like they just look different. Is the only way I know how to describe it. And I think it was the NICU doctor on that same day, he said, we think that Emma has some features of Down syndrome. We want to do some testing, if that's okay. We also would like to test Lily, and we want to check that they are identical twins because they don't look alike. And so then it was still, we had to wait a few more days, but that test right away confirmed that they both had Mosaic Down syndrome. So yeah, they were still in the hospital.
Yeah, a few things coming to mind here. One, how rare is it? Is it so rare that maybe they don't even know that identical twins would share Mosaic Down syndrome but appear physically different?
Yeah, some of it is unknown. The International Mosaic Down Syndrome Association has some info, and they do a lot of research, or are trying to do research. They say that like it's somewhere between like 1 to 3% of people with Down syndrome actually have Mosaic, but there's also guesstimates that it could be as high as like 15% of people, because genetic testing is just evolving so much. There can be people walking around who have a mosaic syndrome who don't even know, because you might not be presenting with any kind of symptoms, or which is what I always kind of say about my daughter Lily, is that if it had just been her, I still don't think we would know that she had mosaic Down syndrome, because we wouldn't have tested her for anything. She's never had any health problems or disabilities related to Down syndrome. So, I mean, there's been a few things that it's like, well, that could be related. Like, she has one tooth that doesn't have enamel on it. Like, that can be a thing that happens with Down syndrome, but you wouldn't just see that one thing and be like, oh, she has Down syndrome. So it's just, there could be more people out there with it than we know. The thing I do know is that online I have met just a handful, like 2 or 3 other moms who have twins that are very similar to mine, where both have mosaic Down syndrome. They look different from one another. They're identical twins, and they each like present it very differently. And one is kind of more affected, I guess, than the other in terms of like it causing disabilities or health things or whatever. So there are other like twins out in the world that are kind of like my girls, but it's very rare for sure.
So with twins, there's an added challenge
Mm-hmm.
when you've got two babies at the same time needing diapers, feedings, baths, all of the
Mm-hmm.
things. You also had a 22-month-old.
Mm-hmm.
It's just been revealed to you now that there are some physical challenges, potentially cognitive challenges coming down the pike for you. This is a two-part question.
Mm-hmm.
One, were you panicked or at peace kind of about the future and the uncertainty of it all? And two, did you feel like your exposure to and your experience in special education prepared you for this parenting journey?
Yeah, I remember thinking, probably before I even had Joshua, I remember thinking like, oh, like what if we had a child with a disability? The thought just crossed my mind, probably when they brought up prenatal screenings, or it's probably when I thought about it. And then I I think I kind of wrote it off as not a big deal. Like, oh, well, I could handle that. Like, I'm going to love my child no matter what. So, like, and I would be well equipped to handle it. Like, I think that was kind of my mindset of like, it's not a big deal. And so I think I've realized there's a lot more nuance to like the whole having your child have a diagnosis like this. Um, it's a lot more complicated than that. Like, it can be true that I totally love my girls and am also like had a lot of grief and sadness over this diagnosis. Like, I got very confused about my emotions, and I'm a pretty like emotional person, and I'm very in touch with my emotions and able to talk about them, which helped in the long run to like work through it. But when you're already in that like newborn fog phase, add in, I mean, it was so much. When I think back to that time, I'm like, I was in just survival mode for months because it was so much. It was just overwhelming. Like, when I think back to that
Mm-hmm.
time, I definitely was not processing the majority of the feelings I was having, because I was in that state of like, I was just forced to, I had to do what I needed to do to take care of my kids. I couldn't
Yeah.
slow down very much to really think about it at first. Um, the girls were in a NICU that was almost an hour away, and my little guy was at home. My husband, by the way, had started, like, we moved back to my hometown, and my husband had started his job, his new teaching job, 3 days before we had our girls. And yeah,
No.
they knew, like, the girls were due in October, but then they were born early September. The school knew that, you know, that this might happen right off the bat. But we decided, like, I don't remember how much time he was able to take off, like a week or something like that, but we waited until the girls came home from the NICU, because that was when I really needed, at the NICU, at least you have, like, there's somebody always there taking care of them around the clock.
Right.
So, somebody can do their feeding or diaper changes or whatever, versus when I was home with all the kids. So, my husband was still working full time when I had them in the NICU. I mean, my parents were an enormous help. That's part of why we moved back, and they watched my toddler. And my dad would drive me to the NICU every day, and he would go off to work because he worked in the same city, and I would be with the girls all day. And then they had a bed for me there, but that's, like, I remember feeling guilt over that. Like, if I didn't stay, feeling super bad and guilty, like, oh, I have the opportunity to stay here in the NICU with them, but my other baby was at home, and I was, like I said, I was so emotionally and physically, like, drained and exhausted that I was kind of close to breaking down, any moment
Mm.
on any given day. So it was good, I think, that I went home some of the time to sleep and stuff, but it was hard. So yeah, there was just a lot of exhaustion and not a lot of thinking too much, except for, I remember the only thoughts that I really had were like, this is overwhelming. I thought that I would be okay, but I'm overwhelmed by the fact that both girls have this diagnosis. Like, I think I could handle just one of them having it, but not
Mm.
both. And I remember then immediately feeling guilty for feeling that way, being mad at myself for feeling that way, and then just, like, beating myself up about it, and kind of being stuck in that cycle and that mindset for probably a few months, honestly, until they were sleeping a little bit better. And then I really started to, like, write a lot. I started a little blog, and I kept that for quite a while, and I just got our whole story out. And, like, through that experience, I think I was finally able to start really processing a lot more of what I was experiencing. I started to connect with other moms who had children with Down syndrome, realized my experience was not unique in how I responded, and started to learn, like, so much of my response was just ignorance, and not, like, despite having my background in special education, it is different when it's your own child. And um I got to kind of start learning what it was like to be the parent in those situations, and what it was like to advocate for your own child. And it's really changed me for the better, but it's definitely been a journey for sure. So
Wow. And and then as you're navigating what life looks like with your three kids, two you have identical twins, but their needs are different, not just their physical appearance, but their needs and abilities are different over time. You end up pregnant again.
yep.
And so what was that like?
Yeah, and, like, I mean, we feel really blessed. Like, we wanted 4 kids, and there was a little more space between them. So the girls were like 2.5 when my youngest was born. The pregnancy, actually, with Matthew, with my youngest, was also when I started processing a lot of what had happened, like 2 years later,
Hmm.
because the
Mm-hmm.
experience of being pregnant again brought up a lot of the trauma from the past pregnancy that I had never worked through. So I really dealt even more so during that pregnancy with a lot of like anxiety. I had panic attacks. I had a lot of stress during that pregnancy, and it definitely was tied directly to everything that had happened prior. And I realized how many fears I had, how many things I had just not dealt with. And so like it ended up being very healing for me, and like I ended up having a really positive delivery experience, and um the team just did so much to like calm my nerves. Like I had hemorrhaged some with the girls, which is pretty common with twins. I was okay. Like I didn't need a blood transfusion, but I was very scared about that happening again. So they like did everything to make sure everything was ready to go should that happen. They were just, this team at our local hospital was just amazing. And then I just remember the moment that like I delivered my son. They kind of checked him over, and my husband came over and just like said quietly to me, he's like, guess what? He's really healthy. He doesn't have to go to the NICU. And I just remember just sobbing and just being like, oh my gosh, I have a baby that doesn't have to go to the NICU. And I just wanted to hold him and stay with him. And you know, I didn't want him to leave my side, which is probably why he ended up being so clingy to me. It was really good, and healing, like I said. Um, the Meanwhile, yes, I had two toddlers that, I didn't have the typical twin experience of like both of them running in two directions, because my like Lily hit milestones at a pretty typical age. So she was definitely in full-blown toddler mode. Like she was climbing, everything. She was much more of a climber than my oldest was. She was very busy. She was a very talkative, a very early talker, and spoke in like full sentences. And she was just all over the place and busy. And Emma she started walking when she was 2. So she would, like, right around her second birthday. So she would have been walking when my youngest was born, but like she has always had a very chill, calm personality. And so she liked to just snuggle, like, constantly. She just always wanted to sit and snuggle. She would quietly listen to music, which she still likes doing to this day. She just sits and listens to music in her spare time. And she still is nonverbal. Like, she uses a communication device. So by nature, she's just very quiet. um, and it's just so interesting. But yeah, she was not as much into that. She wasn't like moving and exploring the way that her sister was. So it was kind of like I had, 4 kids at 4 different ages. Now, it wasn't
Mm,
really until like my youngest hit the toddler stage, and then Emma was much more, she was 4, but she was kind of more in that toddler stage. So the two of them were almost more like twins in like their developmentally. For a while they were just both like
right.
into everything, and just having to keep track of them was just so stressful. And I feel like we had more of that with them, so that was kind of interesting.
Oh, that very interesting. Do you think that it's confusing or challenging for Lily to have this identical twin sister, but to not be the same as her? Does that make
Mm-hmm.
sense?
Yeah, but we've always been like really open with our kids. I feel like by the like first year I was doing a lot of things to participate in the Down syndrome community, and we talk about what Down syndrome is, and we talk about, well, I never said I homeschooled for quite a while there too. For like 4 years I homeschooled our oldest. So when I was home with kids, I was also homeschooling up until last year. Um,
Oh, wow.
yeah, so Emma went, kids did different variations of school though in there. Like some of them went to preschool. Actually, all of them went to preschool. Um, and Emma was at the public school, but like last year she did half days. Like, so we've just done a lot of different variety of things, but I feel like we've done a lot of things to try to be intentional about forming relationships with our kids and having them form relationships with each other, um, and care for one another and love one another. And yes, they still fight like all siblings do. I'm not saying that they don't, but we just do try to do a lot of things to kind of develop a family culture of loving and supporting one another. I think it'll be interesting as the girls get older for, them to process through those things. Lily definitely has shared different things, asked different questions that have come up, but I kind of have just let those come up naturally as they get older. I think I shared on this other podcast that I was on, specifically for moms of kids with Down syndrome, that recently, within the last couple months, Lily was talking to me about her sister and was like, this year at school, some kids were making fun of Emma, and that was like, that's only happened maybe once or twice in her whole life. Like, we've overall had a really positive experience, and like, she has
Mm.
really sweet, sweet kids at school and everything. So I'm not, just don't want to paint a picture like it's all bad or something, but there were a couple times this year that were tough. And we were talking about World Down Syndrome Day, and we were going to share with the classes, and I was asking her if she wanted to share that. And it's kind of tricky because she can, like, Emma, people just know that she has Down syndrome. So it's kind of hard. I've thought about it a lot, how she doesn't really have the opportunity to like not share that about herself because she just looks like she has Down syndrome and people just know. But Lily, like, people don't know that she has it unless she decides to tell them. And so she was processing that, I think, for the first time. She's very much an open book and shares with everyone everything, which she gets from me. Like, she's just like, whatever, I'll tell this person my life story. But that was the first time just a few months ago when we were planning for it. She was like, wait, so if I tell my class that I have Down syndrome, then maybe kids might make fun of me like they did with Emma. And then she paused and she was like, well, I would do that for Emma. And I just thought that was very sweet and very beautiful, and just a testament to just her heart and where she's at, I guess, with um her sister, and with like accepting that this is like a part of her. So yeah, I'm just I'm just really proud of her and proud of my kids.
For sure. What has it been like for you to return to teaching full time? You had all of these years at home with your littles, and now you're teaching full time, and so your routine and everything has shifted some. What has that been like this last year?
I've really enjoyed it. It's definitely come with challenges, but I think I'm just a very extroverted person and outgoing, and I think by far the hardest part of being a stay-at-home mom is just the isolation. And I mean, I have developed a lot of really good friendships with, from like play groups and homeschool friends and things like that, but it just took a lot of time and effort. So I've actually really enjoyed just like having coworkers, even though I'm with children all day still. Um, I love having coworkers. I'm on kind of multiple teams of people, and I just love being a part of those teams and getting to, you know, just have other adults there alongside me who understand what my day was like and what kinds of, work through situations with kids and how to kind of problem solve. So I'm like really enjoying that. And this is not to say, I mean, my husband is fantastic and he, you know, is very much a hands-on parent and everything like that. I don't want to like paint it like I was all alone. But it's just different when your spouse is gone all day. And, as a music teacher, he has a lot of like evening events and he directs musicals and is off accompanying kids for things. Like it's a lot of outside of school hours too. So it's nice to be kind of a part of our little school community. And I mean, it really is pretty wonderful that I'm at the same school where my kids go to school. So that's really nice too, just to, I get to know their teachers and I get to see them throughout the day, different times I see them with their little friends, and it's it's pretty great. So it's been positive, and they've all done really well too with like the transition into public school from homeschool and everything. It's been really positive. So
Yeah. Well, that's fantastic. I have one more question that I'm really curious to know the answer to as we wrap up here. First of all, I am a complete stranger to you. I so appreciate you coming on the podcast, feeling comfortable enough to share your motherhood journey. This has been amazing. I feel like you could come back, and I hope you do at some point for like a part two, maybe a part three, like installment as time goes on. But I'm curious, do you feel like, or have you noticed that maybe even other moms or other families approach you or even treat you in a different manner than they would another mom who didn't have children with special needs? Has that been a thing at all?
I could go a number of ways with this question. One, like I feel like as a special ed teacher, it's helped me so much. I know that I'm a much better teacher than I was before I became a mom, even, and definitely before I became a mom to, a child with disabilities. Like, and that is not to knock. There are some fantastic teachers out there that don't have any kids of their own. Like, I'm not saying that, but I think for me personally, um, I just had a lot of life to live and learn and such. And I think it's really helped me to be a lot more understanding. I hope that's parents' experience of working with me. Like, as I'm a case manager for their children, I hope they feel included. I hope they feel like their voice is heard. Um, I hope they feel like they are not talked down to, but are seen as like an equal member of this team. Well, actually, I think the most important member, just because they've known this child since they were born. And I
Right.
I say all those things because I have been in situations where I've felt those things, where I felt like I was talked down to, or I wasn't being heard, or I wasn't, my advocating wasn't being well received. And so, um, and even with my background in special education, even with knowing what everyone is talking about and all of their like school lingo, even understanding that, I still have had meetings in the past where I feel very like anxious and uncomfortable and like I don't belong, or, you know, as the parent. So I think
Hmm.
it's really helped me to at least be aware that other parents may be having those emotions and like trying to come up with ways to hopefully put them at ease. And I hope I'm being effective at doing that um, as a teacher. But then also just, yes, as a parent and as a mom, I've had a lot of really cool experiences interacting with other people. I've gotten to connect with a few different brand new moms of babies with Down syndrome that got connected to me in one way or another. I like being able to connect with those moms and hopefully give them some encouragement and hope, and really the assurance that what they're feeling is valid, whatever that is, because I really needed that when my girls were first born, and I did get a lot of really good support. But when I like think back, oh, what would have been just like the perfect thing, I try to kind of help support parents and give them a little bit more of what I could have used. Does that answer your question?
It does. It does very, very well. And again, Lauren, thank you so much for coming on the Motherhood Experience and joining me here to share about your journey, and be praying for you in the days ahead.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us on today's episode of the Motherhood Experience podcast. To join our exclusive TME community, head over to themotherhoodexperience.com/learn more. Be sure to follow the Motherhood Experience on Facebook or Instagram, and please leave us a 5-star review wherever you listen to podcasts. If you're watching on YouTube, leave us a comment below, and we'll catch you next time.